I'm Ryan, and this is part 4 of our discussion of Bill O'Reilly and the Electoral College.
And I'm Ryan. We'll discuss whether he is drunk or sober when we return.
You know, Betty White really is the greatest Golden Girl. Choosy parents choose Jif.
He's so mean.
He really is. Hey Ryan, are we out of partisan again?
Bill O'Reilly says white men largely abandoned the Democrats, and the left blames racism and wanting to punish minorities to keep them down. Drunk or sober?
I think he's pretty-ish drunk. I gave him stumbly. I gave him a 0.18. And it's not because what he's saying is entirely false. It's just kind of not accurate entirely. So the assertion that the white men are abandoning the Democrats isn't really accurate. Not that there's a lot of support from white men to Democrats. Historically, so over the last 16 elections, so since Eisenhower, white men have only voted for the Democrat 3 times. They voted for Carter over Ford, voted for Johnson over Goldwater, and Kennedy over Nixon. To be fair, McCain and Obama tied at 50% for the vote of white men. But it's not like they're going away in droves. They've never really been there. Again, to be fair to his point, they did vote this election at a much higher rate for Trump than they have in other elections. So they are going away to some degree, but they're not. It's not this tidal wave because it never existed. And I don't think the Democrats blame racism and the desire to punish minorities. This is where his drunken level came up for me. I have never once heard a liberal or a Democrat say, you know, white people really just want to punish minorities. No? I think that is an asinine assertion.
Okay. No.
I think they blame apathy and just the complete lack of empathy for another position. That's pretty much it. You got next round?
Yeah, so I'm similar to you. I actually went with the drunken uncle 0.13. Okay, so I actually thought he's kind of correct too, but the more statements he makes, the drunker he became. And he might be more than a 0.13. I don't know what a drunken uncle is.
That's good.
But you know, you're sitting around, you know, Christmas time, and your uncle starts talking, and he sounds normal, and then he just says something like crazy. You're like, oh, that's drunk Uncle Billy, you know, or something like that, right? So I'm going with a 0.13.
Okay.
He definitely is drunk. I think he starts off, again, right with a correct statistic. White men have left or are leaving the Democratic Party. I think it's important to note that doesn't mean they're joining the Republican Party, right? It just means they're going to vote Republican, much like I've both voted Republican and Democrat across the board and many times.
Sure.
Right? Because I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. So, but they aren't voting Democrat. And I believe this statistic is correct, and maybe you looked it up. I believe in general, since I think it's Carter, only about 40% of white people even vote Democrat.
I think you're probably close.
I think that's the average, is 40%.
Okay.
So even if you look at where we are today in how they vote, yeah, it's a little bit low. It's low. But, you know, again, with Obama, actually, the first election was quite high.
Yes.
Right? Because that was Obama and McCain.
Yeah, that was seriously good.
And it's dropped off since then, but what we know is, on average, it really doesn't fluctuate a ton. I think overall, this election was 36% is what the white voting was for the Democrat. So there's that. I agree. But we have seen since the early 90s, in fact, that white men have voted less and less in general for the Democrat. But again, I don't think it's a tidal wave either. Now he starts to get a little bit more drunk when he talks about racism being the reason for this. Again, I'm actually giving him a little bit more credit here, but only because I'm going to assume we're talking about this election. Okay.
Okay.
And something was very different about this election. We had Donald Trump. We have lots of social media. We have much more media than we've ever had. And one of the big things that was going on, thanks to media, was Trump rallies.
Right.
And I do think the liberal media, oftentimes, whether or not they beat around the bush or not, they insinuated there is some level of racism at the Trump rallies. Okay. So I'm giving a little bit of credit there, but we all recognize, I think, that the type of person that would go to a rally doesn't represent all of anybody. It's the same type of people that call into a radio show. I mean, across the board, how many of us have actually called into a radio show? Yeah, they got plenty of people, but most of us don't spend hardly any time doing it.
It's probably the super fans.
Right, exactly. Same with the rallies, right? So, but there is, I think, discussion of racism thanks to this election. Secondly, and this is probably the most important fact, is the Democratic candidate referred to Trump supporters as deplorables. Okay, so if she's the voice of liberals, no, not necessarily. We have Bernie Sanders, we got other people there, but you know,
At least of that party at that moment.
exactly, a large party of people. She referred to them as deplorables, and I think there's a bunch of racial sentiment associated with that.
Sure.
So to say that racism isn't part of that, as insinuated by the liberal media, I think would be incorrect for this election specifically. So we got a little bit more drunk. He took advantage of something there. And now, finally, this punitive thing that we talked about. I've never heard that. I've never heard the statement that they're racist and they want to punish minorities. No, I think it's much simpler that, we've talked about this. The first time I ever heard the term white lash was from a black liberal. And
Right.
if anyone was going to play the racist card, you would think it would be a black liberal.
Right.
He didn't. He said white lash is just white people being upset that they're not reaping the benefits that minorities are getting. Not that they want to punish minorities.
Right.
They just feel overlooked, unacknowledged, and they want something that they're not getting. And that's the opposite of being punitive and wanting to punish them. Final call.
Cheers. On to, I believe,
Our last point, Madam Brewmaster.